Greetings. The blustering winds of January have blown you back to the Book of Days project. Welcome back. Today is January 10th. By the way, the Book of Days is now available on blog form on the internet at the bookofdaysproject.blogspot.com, where you can go to find materials related to the Book of Days, to its author, to its subject matter, to its spirit, and to the project bearing its name. Look for illustrations from the book itself, music, and the likes. Today is January the 10th, and we have born this day Dr. George Birkbeck, 1776, died Archbishop Laud, beheaded in 1645. It is the feast day of Saint Marianne, priest, 5th century, Saint Agatho, Pope, 682, Saint William, Archbishop of Bourges, Confessor, 1209. Saint William was deemed a model of monastic perfection. The universal mortification of his senses and passions laid in him the foundation of an admirable purity of heart and an extraordinary gift of prayer, in which he received great heavenly lights and tasted of the sweets which God has reserved for those to whom he is pleased to communicate himself. The sweetness and cheerfulness of his countenance testify the uninterrupted joy and peace that overflowed his soul and made a virtue appear with the most engaging charms in the midst of austerities. He always wore a hair shirt under his religious habit, and never added nor diminished anything in his clothes, either winter or summer. That a quotation from Butler. Archbishop Laud, the bane of parliamentarians. The name of Laud does not savor agreeably in the minds of Englishmen, yet it will be generally admitted that he was unjustly and vindictively treated. The career of the man from a humble origin to the primate's throne, which he attained in 1633, need not be detailed. Led by a love of the old ceremonies of the church, though, as he always alleged, with no affection for Rome, he became the principal minister of Charles I in those unhappy moments for introducing episcopacy in Scotland and checking Puritanism in England, which, in combination with arbitrary political rule, brought on the Great Civil War. He was called to the council of Charles I, according to his own statement, against his will, yet he devised and executed many unwarrantable revenue schemes. He doubtless believed in the divine right of kings, and being opposed, an unhappy infirmity of temper induced him to concur in many cruel and arbitrary schemes to crush opposition and render his master independent of parliaments. These expedients succeeded for a while, but at length, failing, the king was compelled to call his last parliament November 3rd, 1640. In early next year, the archbishop was impeached of treason by the commons and sent to the Tower, where he remained exposed to many hardships until his death. In 1643, he was accused of designs of overthrowing parliaments and bringing about union with Rome. Prine, the barrister who was Laud's personal enemy, collected evidence against him, seized his private papers and even his prayer book, and took his diary by force out of his pocket. Prine tampered with the evidence to suit the views of his party, but the proofs were so weak that the peers were disinclined to convict him. He has left a full and on the whole faithful account of his trial, in which he defended himself with courage and ability. The Commons then changed the impeachment to an ordinance for Laud's execution, to which the Lords is sentenced. He had procured a pardon from the king, which was disregarded, and Laud was brought to the block on Tower Hill, mainly, it is alleged, to gratify the extreme Presbyterians of Scotland and induce them to go heartily on with the war, this party having been inspired with bitter feelings regarding the unhappy primate, whom they considered as the main author of the calamities they had been for several years enduring. Also on this day, let us speak of the penny post. The 10th of January, 1840, will be a memorable day in the history of civilization, as that on which the idea of a penny postage was first exemplified. The practical benefits derived from this reform are so well known that it is needless to dwell upon them. Let us rather turn our attention for a few moments to the remarkable yet most modest man whom his species have to thank for this noble invention, the penny post. Rowland Hill, born in 1795, was devoted through all of his early years, even from boyhood, to the business of a teacher. It was about the year 1835 that he turned his attention to the postal system of the country, with the conviction that it was susceptible of reform. Under enormous difficulties, he contrived to collect information upon the subject so as to satisfy himself and enable him to satisfy others that the public might be benefited by a cheaper postage. And yet the revenue remained ultimately undiminished. The leading facts on which he based his conclusions have been detailed in an authoritative document. The cost of a letter to the post office, he saw, was divisible into three branches. First, that of receiving the letter and preparing it for its journey, which under the old regime was troublesome enough, as the postage varied first in proportion to the distance it had to travel, and again according as it was composed of 1, 2, or 3 sheets of paper, each item of charge being exorbitant. For instance, a letter from London to Edinburgh, if simple, was rated at 1 shilling, if double at 2 shilling, and if treble at 3 shilling. Any, the minutest, enclosure being treated as an additional sheet. The duty of taxing letters or writing upon each of them its postage thus became a complicated transaction, occupying much time and employing the labor of many clerks. This and other duties which we will not stop to specify comprised the first of the three branches of expense which each letter imposed on the office. The second was the cost of transit from post office to post office. And this expense, even for so great a distance as from London to Edinburgh, proved, upon careful examination, to be no more than the 9th part of a farthing. The third branch was that of delivering the letter and receiving the postage, letters being for the most part sent away unpaid. Rowland Hill saw that, although a considerable reduction of postage might and ought to be made, even if the change rested there, yet that if he could cheapen the cost to the post office, the reduction to the public could be carried very much further, without entailing on the revenue and any ultimate loss of serious amount. He therefore addressed himself to the simplification of the various processes. If, instead of charging according to the number of sheets or scraps of paper, a weight should be fixed, below which a letter, whatever might be its context, should only bear a single charge, much trouble to the office would be spared, while an unjust mode of taxation would be abolished. For certainly, a double letter did not impose double cost, nor a treble letter threefold cost upon the post office, but if the alteration had rested there, a great source of labor to the office would have remained, because postage would still have been augmented upon each letter in proportion to the distance it had to travel. In the absence of knowledge as to the very minute cost of mere transit, such an arrangement would appear just. Or to place the question in another light, it would seem unjust to charge as much for delivering a letter at the distance of a mile from the office in which it was posted as for delivering a letter at Edinburgh transmitted from London. But when Rowland Hill had by his investigation ascertained that the difference between the cost of transit in the one instance and the other was an insignificant fraction of a farthing, it became obvious that it was a near approximation to perfect justice to pass over this petty inequality than to tax it even to the amount of the smallest coin of the realm, a penny no less. With regard to the third head, all that could be done for lessening the costs attendant on delivering the letters from house to house was to devise some plan of prepayment which should be acceptable to the public, so long accustomed to throw the cost of correspondence on the receiver of a letter instead of the sender, and which at the same time should not transfer the task of collection to the receiving office, while it relieved the letter carriers attached to the distributing office. Otherwise, comparatively little would have been gained by the change. This led to the proposal for prepayment by stamped labels, whereby the post office is altogether relieved from the duty of collecting postage. Thus, one by one, were the impediments all removed to the accomplishment of a grand object, uniformity of postage throughout the British Isles. Thus did the penny post get its beginnings on January the 10th in the British Isles of old. Thank you for joining us on the Book of Days project. See you tomorrow, January the 11th, and many happy returns.